Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture. Who here has seen Pushover, the story of temptation, a 1954 film noir starring Fred MacMurray and Kim Novak, directed by Richard Quine. It's a pretty darn good movie, so why don't we go ahead, roll through it, and I can talk to you about why it's such a good little film noir and well worth your time watching it. And since we are going to be running through the entire film, spoiler alert up, because we are going to be getting right down into the plot. So, this is the city, Los Angeles, California. That's how Dragnet starts. And this is how we begin the movie, with some street scenes of Los Angeles, California, circa 1954. We focus on the Bank of Southern California and a bank job. As a guard approaches the building, a workman jumps down from this ledge, gets in behind him with a gun, and he and his compatriots get access to the bank. And one of them, of course, carries a bag that they're going to fill with money once they can get into the vault, which does have a time lock. And while this guy sits holding his gun, staring at that front door, waiting for the bank manager to get there, we get the credits. Columbia Pictures Corporation presents Pushover. Stars Fred MacMurray, one of the great ones, model for Captain Marvel, super dad on My Three Sons. But I mean, he did a whole lot of Hollywood movies with some of the great Hollywood stars. And he also had already done a really good film noir called Double Indemnity with Barbara Stanwyck. Phil Carey, who would become famous as Asa Buchanan on One Life to Live, the soap opera, but who also put on a pretty good performance in a movie I reviewed on this channel a while back called Screaming Mimi. Neat little movie to watch, really good cinematography. And this one introduces Kim Novak. Now, she'd had a couple of very, very minor roles in things. This is her first big role. This is the first time that America, that the world is going to really get to see Kim Novak. She is, has the cool blonde look, a little detached, and you're going to get that in this movie. In fact, I think you'll see that the Kim Novak that you get in a lot of other films, that persona was really already there from the start, which also tells you it's a very authentic persona. We also have Dorothy Malone, E.G. Marshall, Alan Norse. Now, fans of Noir will obviously recognize Dorothy Malone for her great scene with Bogart in The Big Sleep in 1946. And she won an Academy Award for Written on the Wind 2 years after this film was released. E.G. Marshall, great character actor, and really the go-to guy for the kind of role that he plays in this movie. So, as we see, screenplay by Roy Huggins, based upon stories by Thomas Walsh and William S. Ballinger. So they kind of combined to a novel, and maybe the other one, I'm not sure if it was a novel or short story, but they combined them together for this film. But we see tellers are arriving while the credits are still rolling. And as they do, there's the guy with the gun ushering them over to the counter. And finally, the manager arrives and they usher him to the vault. And I'll note, all of this has been done in silence with only a music accompaniment. There's been no talking, no nothing. And you could almost say that this whole scene of the bank job is unnecessary. But I think there was one thing in particular that they wanted us to see. And then the credit rolls for Richard Quine, the director. And as the credit rolls, the money is being placed in the bag from the vault. Quine was a child actor in vaudeville and Hollywood, went on to be a screenwriter and a director. Other films of his include Bell, Book, and Candle, another Kim Novak picture, and a very good one that I'll review one of these days on this channel for sure, because I love it. The World of Susie Wong, How to Murder Your Wife, The Prisoner of Zenda. So he was definitely doing a lot of those movies from that period, 60s period, that was kind of trying to push the envelope on things. How to Murder Your Wife, not something that you probably would have gotten, say, in 1945, 1946. So here's the scene that I think makes this all worthwhile. As these guys are leaving, everything's gone to plan. The guard makes a move and ends up being shot. So now this isn't just a bank robbery. It's also a murder rap, which is going to elevate it in the eyes of the police. They're going to be more determined to solve the crime, catch the guys who did it. But it's also a theme that you're going to see in this film and in a lot of other film noirs, which is plans often go awry. In other words, maybe there's no perfect crime. Okay, we now switch scenes. It's nighttime, somewhere presumably in LA. And we see a street scene, people wandering around, and we start zooming in on a movie theater, and in particular, this woman, Kim Novak, leaving the theater. And as she does, we see that she almost walks under a ladder. There's that little glance upward. She sidesteps it. Getting into her car, she finds that it doesn't start. And while she's kind of working on it, trying to get it to go, a voice surprises her. But she smiles when she sees that it's the guy from My Three Sons, and therefore she's in no danger. Well, no, it is a friendly face. He offers to help, so she lets him in the car. And as they chat, he finds that she noticed him in the theater and wondered why he was alone. And he wondered the same thing about her. So there's an instant sort of a little rapport, a little bit of spark between the two of them. And when he gets out to check under the hood, you see her kind of checking her makeup in the mirror. It's a nice scene. We'll get a few mirror shots in this one, which is another shot that you see in a lot of film noir. So he can't get the car to start. They head over to a bar where she can make a call to an auto mechanic who can come out and work on it. And so we have the two of them chatting at this table, and she seems rather taken, rather enraptured by this guy. He seems to be a little bit more reserved. When they find out that the car is not going to be ready until the next day, she asked him if he'd like to take her home. Your place or mine? Surprised me. So we're getting a little bit of a seduction here. So they do go back to his place. They play a record. They have another drink, and you get verbal dueling between the two of them. You know, a little bit of seduction, a little bit of playing, and then this abrupt kiss. And through this, you're kind of wondering, like, what is going on with this guy? He seems a little bit antagonistic, which you wouldn't expect a guy to be antagonistic when a woman who looks like Kim Novak wants you to take her to your apartment. Unless you suspected something was up. So he gets a call and is still confused talking with her about what she was doing at the theater alone. There's a little bit of questioning going on. But he gets the call. It's the auto mechanic. You see her checking herself in the mirror once again. And so when they find that, the mechanic's asking where he can deliver the car, he says, deliver it to my place in the morning. Okay, and then back to the good stuff. So you kind of get where this is going, even though it's 1954. So they're going to be, a little bit vague about it. So we're going to get a few things here that are just fundamental to noir. Things go wrong when you don't follow the rules. What are the rules? Well, the rules are, actually pretty conservative, when you get right down to it. And film noirs are a very conservative genre, even though people think, it's crime and it's sex and it's all, but it's always about how those things lead to your downfall, or generally it's about that. And so they're kind of coloring out of the lines here. They meet, they barely know each other, and she's already spending the night. Okay, so that says they're already kind of in trouble. So the next morning, and another change of scene, we're at a police station where Lieutenant Ekstrom, who is played by E.G. Marshall, is sitting at the desk there. And he's on a really tense call with, a superior. We're doing the best we can. They're on the trail of Harry Wheeler. And Harry Wheeler was a man identified at the bank robbery that we saw earlier in the film. And as they're talking, enter the man we saw last night with the woman. His name is Paul. He is a cop. And they say, well, what did you get from her? Well, nothing definite. Well, what do you want? Another 3 days with her? And he goes, I didn't want the first 3 days with her. So once again, we see this attitude that seems very antagonistic. But I mean, wasn't antagonistic when he was on the couch with her. That's for sure. But he is satisfied that this woman is Wheeler's girl. So they're on the right track. So obviously, this was all a setup. So maybe now we understand why he was a little antagonistic. Shouldn't really be getting that close to her. Shouldn't have spent the night with her. But he did, and he's already trying to sort of hide what's going on with these guys. And here we see a shot of Harry Wheeler. So you can see, what is it, like born 1921, Ontario, California. One probably suspects there at any rate. And then they look at a layout of an apartment building. This would be the girls' apartment building that they were, sort of staking out. Now they're really going to stake her out. And so they're looking at this map. Here's where her apartment is. We're going to be across this courtyard where we can, look through binoculars into her apartment. We're going to have a guy stationed outside. So Patty, older cop, thinks that the guy they're looking for is probably halfway to Peru, and this is probably a complete waste of time. He doesn't think this guy's going to show. The boss is more like, well, look, we don't have a lot to go on, so we're going to do this. And Paul says, he goes, well, what do you think, Paul? Do you think he's going to be around? And he says, oh, he'll be around, which is a commentary on his girlfriend. In other words, if Kim Novak is waiting for you, you're probably going to come back. And he's very cool through this entire exchange. He's not showing any emotion. He's not showing any signs of what he was doing the night before. And so they are reminded that Ekstrom wants Wheeler alive, because they need to find the $210,000 that he stole from the bank. And a final warning for Paul as the other two leave: keep an eye on Patty. I'd like to see him get his pension, and he won't if he slips again. Well, what does that mean? Well, in 1954, if you got a cop nicknamed Patty, there's a good chance it involves alcohol, because that's sort of the stereotype associated with the Irish at the time. So now we get this exterior shot of the apartment building, and we see, the men are staking out the building. Paul enters and is going up to the fourth floor, and behind him is another cop, Rick, played by Phil Casey. And it's somewhat evident that Rick doesn't buy Paul's cold act towards the girl, and that's how they're referring to her at this point. But her name is Lona McLean. And they get into the apartment that they're using for the stakeout. They're filled in by the day watch, what's been going on. They think she's definitely waiting for somebody. And so what do you think? This is Rick, looking through the binoculars at Lona, and he says, you're right, he'll be around. So in other words, this guy's coming back for Lona, no doubt about it. And she makes a call. So they have a little thing set up to record all the calls, and they get it all prepped. And she's just calling for the time. And Rick remarks, new car, mink coat, no clocks in the joint. Okay, interesting. What's going on with this woman? And Paul says, you just don't like women, Rick. And he says, well, what keeps you single? Well, maybe I like them too much. Okay, we're foreshadowing a little bit what's going on with Paul. And then we get a little discussion between the two of them of women and marriage. And Paul remembers his parents. They were always fighting about money. And he decided when he was a kid that he'd have plenty of dough when he grew up, one way or another. And yet here he is, a cop who does not have a lot of dough. Again, we're doing a little bit of foreshadowing here. And then we see Rick moves the binoculars and looks into the apartment next door and spies on the neighbor. She's a nurse who's just gotten home from work. And, you see kind of a little smile on his face. He takes an immediate shine to this woman. And he then notes shifting back. Oh yeah, Lona's heading out. So Paul heads out to follow her. She ends up at Paul's apartment building and looks peeved when she sees him. She says, change your mind about going out of town. So obviously that was his story for why he wasn't going to be able to see her again. And he just responds, yeah. He's still kind of cold, still kind of antagonistic towards her. And you always love shots like this. Film noir is great for him. One actor in the light, one actor in shadow. It's sort of a commentary about who they are and what they're going through at that moment. Something to look for when you're watching film noirs. It's a common shot that they do. So Lona talked to the mechanic and she realizes her car didn't start because Paul did something to it, and she wants to know why. And he lies, says he saw her in the theater and he liked the way she walked, so he wanted to meet her, and that was how he did it, which, by the way, should be a real red flag for you. But she's not buying it, calls him a liar, and she knows he's a cop. And he lies again, says Harry Wheeler he's not a cop. Harry Wheeler wanted him to keep an eye on her, so he wants to make her think that he's associated with Harry Wheeler. She slaps him, calls him a dirty cop, so clear she doesn't buy the story. He restrains her, tells her to take it easy, and then once again, they kiss. And she wants to know if these last few days they had together were just for his job, and he tells her no, they weren't. But now it's over. He's going to take her downtown for questioning. And I love this line of hers as they're getting ready to leave. She goes, well, it's been weird knowing you. It's a line you could see in the 60s, late 60s, 70s. You know, it's been weird knowing you. In 1954, that really struck me. It's an interesting line. So she claims at this point, she didn't know Harry was a crook. And by the way, I love how she's in the foreground, kind of blurry. They have him sharp in the background. Look at that face as he's trying to size her up. But she claims didn't know Harry was a crook. She admits she stuck around because he bought her clothes, a car, a decent place to live, things she'd never had before. All right. So Paul always wanted to have money when he grew up, so he didn't have to worry about it. And he's a cop, probably living paycheck to paycheck. This is the first time she's ever had things like she has now that Harry's given her. And another line, I believe was from her, money isn't dirty, just people. Great line. So there's some really good lines in this one. So she wants to know what's going to happen to Harry if he gets caught. And Paul replies, he killed a man. All right. So that pretty much tells you. And what about the money? Well, what do you think? I think it's a lot of money. The moment of temptation. He tells her to go home. Why? I don't know. Go home before I start thinking about it. So there's this temptation. Harry gets caught. Harry goes away. But what about the money? So she's dangling that in front of him. She doesn't want to go, not yet, and she makes a persuasive argument for sticking around, as you can see. And now the pitch. Now she makes it right out in the open. We could get that money, Paul. Harry's going to die anyways. What does it matter how or when? And he says, I thought I was using you. Get out. Okay, so he rejects this plan. Back at the stakeout, since Lona isn't home, Rick is spying on the nurse again, and the music tells you that he is rather smitten by this woman. So, I mean, again, this is a stakeout. He's not just some random guy staring at a woman through a window with binoculars. Should he be? Probably not, but it's kind of coming from the right place. He just thinks she is really fantastic. He's not trying to do anything creepy. So at this point, Lona arrives home, and Paul arrives back as well. But instead of going right into that room where they're doing the stakeout, he walks down the hall to a window, lights a cigarette, and it shows that he's thinking. He told her to get out, but he's thinking about it. And the fact is, if he's thinking about it, he's probably already decided. And we get here another lie when he goes in, tells Rick, well, she just drove around to nowhere. So Paul's already lying now to his buddy, to a fellow cop. So he's already getting himself in trouble, and really to an extent at this point that he might not be able to get out of it without some kind of punishment. So it does sort of create a need for him to maybe see this through. I mean, it's not too late to jump out at this point, but it's getting there. And so Paul goes downstairs to relieve Patty, who is in the car. So Patty's going back up there, and you could see he's really, really, really thinking. So the next day he's at home, kind of on the couch again, cigarette, thinking about things, gets a phone call from Rick, who's like, "Hey, we're at the bowling place. Where are you?" "Oh, I forgot. I think I'm not feeling that good. I think I'm going to skip it today." So the next night, or that night, he's starting to show his nerves a little bit. And when Rick is heading in for his shift, he sees the nurse that he's been spying on with a date. And the date doesn't want to take no for an answer. He's given her a lot of trouble. He intercedes. And so a connection is made between these two characters, and it's going to be important later in the story. But the delay in him getting up there has Paul kind of stewing in his own juices, and he finally gives in, and he dials Lona's number and quickly tells her to go up to the roof so he can talk to her. She didn't realize until now that she was being watched. So he goes up, because obviously Lona's left, so he's going to go out and follow her. So he goes up to the roof, steps out, sees her, and immediately says, "You win," and they kiss. He lets her know that her phone is being tapped, and 3 men are watching her day and night. And she lets him know that Harry is arriving, maybe even tomorrow, so soon. So Paul tells her that you got to stop him. It's too soon. We're not ready for this. Well, he learns that there's a signal for when Harry calls. And if she gives the all clear, he'll arrive 10 to 15 minutes later and should have the money. So Paul quickly works out a plan with her, and the die is cast. He is now in too far to get out. The next night, the phone rings, but it isn't after 7. And he said, "Listen, don't answer the phone till after 7. So Lona does not answer, and the cops on stakeout are trying to figure out why. Why is she just ignoring the phone? It doesn't make any sense. At this point, Paul and Rick show up for their shift, and the cops that are leaving tell them, what just happened. So already there's a little tiny crack in the plan. Just a little something to create suspicion. That's a weird thing. Why is she doing that? Okay, something's going on. And you're going to find Rick slowly kind of guessing that there's maybe something going on that he's not aware of. So that's already there. So again, one of these elements of film noir is there's no perfect crime, and you come up with this plan, you give in to temptation, you cross the line, and watch out because things could spin wildly out of control. And the tension is definitely rising for Paul. And I like the way he's showing that tension. Now, when he's dealing with people, when he's talking with people, he's cool as a cucumber. But when they're not around, you can see he's not 100% on this. So we're going to thicken the plot a little bit here because Patty is in the car downstairs. He is bored. He is restless. And he catches sight of a bar across the street. And you recall the conversation that Paul had with the lieutenant in his office about if he slips up again, he could lose his pension. Okay. So he's looking at that bar, but pulls out a stick of gum, chews it. The temptation's there, just like with Paul, had that temptation. And it's strong, but he is resisting it for now. So Rick, of course, has his own temptation, which is the nurse, who he'll be watching when nothing's going on in Lona's apartment. And then the call comes through. Now it's after 7. She's allowed to answer the phone because Paul is there. Call comes through, and the signal is given. And when she goes out, Paul lets Rick go after her this time. Now, he's always been the one going up until now. Now he lets Rick go. So all is going according to plan. And the plan is that while she leads Rick away, Paul's going to get over into the apartment. When Harry comes in, Paul's going to shoot him and take the money. Okay, simple plan. So when Paul calls down to Patty in the car, there's no answer. Patty isn't where he's supposed to be. What if Patty sees him? He needs to know where Patty is, and he's got to move fast because Harry should get there in 10 to 15 minutes. Meanwhile, Lona, leading Rick far away from the ambush that she and Paul have set up, Paul rushes downstairs to look for Patty and sees him exiting the bar, and he starts to bawl him out when they see Harry. They follow him up, worried he might run when he finds out that Lona isn't home. And this is where the plan starts really breaking down. They end up taking Wheeler when he leaves the apartment building, because indeed he gets up there, she's not home. He scurries out because he knows something's going on here. So he leaves the apartment building. They get a hold of him and they head over to his car to see if the money is there. And the car's kind of around the corner in a somewhat secluded place. And sure enough, the money's in the trunk. And Paul now seizes the moment. He shoves Harry into Patty, who was at that point looking down into the trunk. So he doesn't know he's been shoved. And he immediately fires a couple bullets into Harry's back, claiming that Harry made a move on him, was trying to attack Patty. And so he shot him. And there you go. So here's where he starts weaving another tale. We were supposed to take this guy alive. There was a screw up here. As far as Patty knows, it's Patty's fault because he went across to that bar. Well, okay, we don't have to tell anybody about this, right? I'll protect you. I won't let you lose your pension. And so he says, what we'll do is we'll put Wheeler's body in the trunk. I'll drive him out to some secluded place and dump him. And here Patty starts to get a little bit suspicious. When they find Wheeler, will they find the money too? So Lona has led Rick to this piano bar. There's like these two big pianos. It's a great shot there. And so she's at the bar and she heads over to make a call back to her apartment because Paul's supposed to be there. No answer. And he gets to the phone just a second too late to answer. She returns to the bar and this guy's hitting on her. You know, I don't get it. And you won't. So try someplace else. And she spills a drink on the guy, which Rick kind of likes. He's across the bar watching her. She goes back, makes another call. And this time Paul answers, says, look, it's done. There's been a complication. I can handle it. You need to get back to your apartment right now. And now another complication, because as Paul is leaving her apartment, opens the door, there's the next door neighbor, that nurse. She was having a party, wanted to borrow some ice. And he quickly kind of, no, I can't help you, and closes the door. Okay. But now he's been seen someplace where he's not supposed to be. So Rick gets back, lets him know it was a dry run, nothing happened, and he thinks that she spotted him. Paul was looking into the nurse's apartment before Rick got there. Is he pondering another murder? What's he going to do about this nurse? And the lieutenant arrives unexpectedly to announce that their man Wheeler is in town. He's been spotted at a drugstore. The lieutenant sends Paul out to check parked cars in the area while he hangs around the stakeout for a while. And here you see that Rick is starting to maybe suspect something. He thinks Lona knew her phone was tapped. But how? When Paul is gone, the lieutenant reveals that he called about a half dozen times while he was gone. There was no answer. And no answer from Patty either. So where were they? And he now knows that Paul lied about being in the room the whole time. And he knows Patty isn't being honest as well. Rick reveals that when he followed Lona, he saw that Patty wasn't in the car and he saw him walk into a bar. Maybe this is why Paul is covering for him. So while the lieutenant and Rick are talking upstairs, Paul runs down to commiserate with Patty in the car and says, look, give me the keys so I can drive this car with the body out. And Patty's like, no. He's going to come clean. He realizes what Paul is up to. And he pulls a gun on Paul, who's like, a little taken back, that his lies aren't working out the way he thought they were. But at that point, the phone in the car rings. It's Lieutenant calling down there. And that distracts Patty for a moment. Paul makes a move. They struggle over the gun. And Patty ends up dead. Things are really spinning out of control. Paul grabs the keys and runs for Wheeler's car, leaving Rick and the lieutenant to find Patty's body in the car. But this really isn't Paul's night. He finds that the car is missing. He runs back, says he heard a shot, and now the lieutenant confronts him about his earlier lie. And as the ambulance arrives for Patty, Paul is, using the payphone in the apartment building to call Lona. He ducks back in as her neighbor and her friends pass by. MacMurray does a really nice job of showing the tension and the nerves are getting to him without overdoing it. And so he's lying again to the lieutenant about, I came down because Patty was drinking, blah, blah, blah. He's a lot of lies in. He's now killed a fellow cop. He's killed Harry Wheeler. I mean, he's committed at this point, and it is not going well. And the neighbor, while outside, spots Rick over by the ambulance with all the other police. Okay. Paul and Lona meet on the roof once again. He starts babbling about killing Patty, and it was an accident. He tells her everything's gone wrong. So he's starting to really lose it. She's keeping her cool. And, but he says, I've killed Patty. The neighbor saw me. The car's gone. Like, he realizes Patty must have moved it. And he starts to calm down. Wait, if he moved it, it can't be very far. So when Rick is heading back into the building, the nurse is waiting. Ask him if it was anything serious. He says no. They begin talking, heading up in the elevator. And at the meeting, while that's happening, Lona and Paul are on the roof trying to spot the car, and Lona sees it. And they concoct a plan to allow Paul to drive the car somewhere and drop the body. In the hall, Rick and the nurse continue their talk, and she mentions the man next door being rude about the ice cubes. And Rick's like, the man next door? You mean the woman, right? No, it was a man. Okay, he knows something is up, but he hasn't put it together just yet. So Paul has to sneak past them to get back into the room. And when Rick gets in there, he announces that Wheeler was in Lona's room. So he's made an assumption. The man in the room was probably Wheeler. And the nurse, Anne, can identify him, which of course Paul knows that means she can identify him. So Rick calls headquarters, lets the lieutenant know to call him when he gets back in because he's got something kind of big. And he tells Paul that he doesn't think Patty killed himself. And he doesn't think it was Wheeler either. He thinks the killer sat right in the car next to him when it happened. We next see Lona once again pulling away in her car, followed by Rick. She knows she's being followed, and this is to give Paul time to do something with the car. So he runs downstairs, kind of goes down the back way. There's kind of a security door into the garage, so he rigs it so he can get back in that way. So gets into the car, and when Paul returns, he's sure nobody's been there. He set up like a little piece of paper that would, drop to the floor if somebody had opened the door. So the paper's still there where it's supposed to be. Okay, good. The phone was off the hook, and thus it would appear to be busy. And he even sets things up to make it look like he's been there smoking the whole time. He takes some cigarettes, and he's kind of rips them in half, and then lights, to make it look like there's been a whole bunch of them. And while he's waiting, we now see that he is spying on Anne. He's nervous about her. At this point, the lieutenant rushes in. Wheeler's body has been found. Oh, big surprise to Paul. He takes Rick over to Lona's to investigate, to question her, leaving Paul behind. And as soon as they're gone, Paul calls Lona to warn her. We get a nice scene here with Kim Novak, again, the cool blonde. She does play it pretty cool through here. I mean, she's angry that they're over there, but she's not letting anything get away here. And so Rick starts searching her bedroom, and the lieutenant starts questioning her about Harry Wheeler. She claims she doesn't know him. Lieutenant Ekstrom tells Rick to call over to the stakeout. and have their log of phone calls brought over. So now fate plays another trick. As Paul walks over, Anne leaves her apartment with a box of trash, probably from the party. So she's not going to be in her apartment now, right? Paul enters Lona's apartment, and she continues to play it cool. Obviously the two of them know each other because he was making contact with her to get information. She thinks he's a cop, blah, 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 blah. So she doesn't like him. And since she doesn't like him, Ekstrom's like, yeah, why don't you just leave? You're just going to bother her. When he walks out, it's just in time for Anne to spot him. He tries to avoid her, but she knows that that's the man she saw. That's the killer. She hurries into her apartment, locks the door, calls the police. I've spotted the murderer, etc. Okay. So Paul spots this from his stakeout room with the binoculars, and he seems to make a terrible decision at this point, and he is visibly shaken about it. And while he's making this decision, police headquarters calls the stakeout room to tell him what they've heard from this witness, and he better get the lieutenant. So he knows he is sunk at this point if he doesn't do something. He rushes over. Obviously, he doesn't tell the lieutenant about this. Rushes over, rings the woman's bell. So who is it? It's the police. Okay. So she opens the door, and he immediately gets a hold of her as he goes in. It covers her mouth so she can't scream. And so he holds her at gunpoint, tells her that if she does what she's told, she won't be hurt. Paul embarked on a course here we see that he was really not capable of following through on. He has committed 2 murders. One of them was an accident, and you don't think he could probably bring himself to shoot her. So he's a good man who gave into temptation. It's all going out of control, but the problem with being a good man giving into temptation is you don't have what it takes. You're not evil. You don't have what it takes to make temptation really pay for you. So Rick and the lieutenant at this point get back to the room and find that Paul is gone. And while this is happening, Paul ushers Anne into Lona's apartment, tells Lona, get dressed, we're leaving. Downstairs, Rick and the lieutenant discover that Paul didn't leave the building, and they find out about the call from Anne to the police. So now they know. All right, Paul is the one. Paul is the guy we're looking for. Rick goes rushing back upstairs because obviously this is somewhat personal for him. Paul leads the women down the stairs so he can avoid Rick. Again, nice use of shadow here. It's a little claustrophobic. And while other police are searching the building, Rick and another cop are sent to cover the back, which is precisely where Paul is going because that's where the car is. And there's this long, tense walk down this alley. Great use of shadow here as well because there's they're going through light, then shadow, light, shadow, but at different rates. While one's in the light, another one's in shadow and vice versa. Really nicely shot. And you see the story these faces are telling. Anne is obviously worried, but there is a sort of determination there. Paul, you can tell he's in way over his head. And Lona back there, she looks worried, but not maybe in the same way that Paul is worried. So they round the corner, and Paul spots the patrol car right behind Wheeler's. And he ducks back in. And he says to Anne, okay, I got a gun on you. You go across the street to the car, retrieve the case of money from the trunk, gives her the keys. Don't do anything stupid, okay? But as she's over there doing that, Rick appears, and he spots her. And Paul doesn't see Rick. So Rick gets down low, you can see kind of behind the car, and he tells her, and doesn't scream it or anything, duck behind the car, when the firing starts. And then he begins to shoot over at that corner where Paul and Lona are. This sends them running, and Paul sends Lona off so he can make a grab for the money, and she doesn't want him to go. So we're actually seeing a different kind of emotion from the sort of very cool, Ice Queen. And believe me, she was showing a lot of nerves and tension waiting for the call and things like that. So she isn't completely emotionless, right? But it looks like maybe she's a little more, she's putting Paul higher than that money at this point. He's had a real impact on her. He wants that money. And as he runs across for the car, he is shot and he collapses to the ground. And as Lona looks on from across the street, Rick walks over and he tells Rick he's sorry. Rick says, yeah, I'm sorry too. And the rest of the police, arrive. She kind of comes out of the shadows. She calmly walks across the street, leans over him, sheds a tear. And he says to her, we didn't really need the money, did we? Very kind of sad. So they, lead her away, and she gives one last look at Paul's body, before she gets into the patrol car. And at that point, Rick takes Anne back across the street to her apartment, as we see the end. Pushover, 1954. It's well shot. It's well acted. I like the way Fred MacMurray plays it, seemingly tough, but not really prepared for this. You get the feeling that he's a good man who gave in to temptation, but man, was he over his head. But a really nice performance from Novak too. And yeah, she's the seductress. She wants that money at first, but I think she also wants Paul. But when it comes down to it at the end, she'd rather have Paul than the money. And that's a nice little character arc. She's not just the cold, femme fatale seductress. There's a little bit more going on with her. Good performance from Casey as Rick. Good performance from Dorothy Malone as Anne. There's some nice moments between those two. And there is kind of that juxtaposition of here's two romances coming out of this situation, and one of them the right way and the other one the wrong way. And we see how they end. And of course, E.G. Marshall does a great job in the kind of role. He was just a go-to for that kind of role. I know he did, what was it? It was a lawyer show, probably pretty near this time. It might have been more early 60s. It was like a father-son lawyer team. God, that might be the one too with Mr. Brady. Why am I blanking on his name? Any rate, E.G. Marshall does a nice job. The cinematographer, Lester White, didn't have like a super impressive resume. Did a lot of movies and a lot of B movies. But I think he brings it really nicely here. Does a good job with the shadow, with the light. It's a good plot. It's not overly complex, but it works. And again, you get those nice character moments in it. It's a good, solid film. Well worth watching. The Pushover, 1954. So what say you, the audience? If you've seen this film, what do you think of it? Is it one you like? Is it one you have a problem with? I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments. If you enjoyed this little video review of The Pushover, please give it a like. Maybe think of subscribing to the channel. If you do subscribe, you want to hit that little notification bell so you see when my videos are released. Maybe share this with a friend if you think they might be interested in this review. Maybe they like film noir, or maybe you're just trying to get them into movies from this period and you think this might help bring them into the fold. I really appreciate it if you do that. It helps my little channel grow. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. Watch The Pushover. And hopefully I'll see you again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.